I am actually going to start our meeting with two things that I have used in my AFP meetings here. Now, this is not an official AFP meeting. You don't have to be an AFP member to be part of this conversation. But funny enough, Jordan and I did meet just exactly to the day, exactly 1 month ago at AFP Icon, which is an international conference in Toronto. And so I'm very excited um, to tell you a little bit of the origin story of how we did this. But let's start first with our land acknowledgement. And I will also copy and paste it into the chat so that you can use it for your meetings if you so choose. And with our land acknowledgement, I would like to recognize that the land on which we live and work, even digitally, includes the traditional homelands of Indigenous people. By acknowledging the land, we recognize that it holds special significance for its original stewards and peoples of the region. So, with that, if you could click on the link that I've included in the chat and just share with us where are you calling in from using that map. I myself, Jennifer Lee Dotson, I am calling in from the traditional homelands of the Steilacoom and Puyallup tribes, which is also known as Tacoma, Washington. So go ahead and drop that in the chat. We'd love to sort of start to get to know each other. I also would like to begin our meeting today with a brave and safe agreement. I've also copied that into the chat if you should choose to use it at your meetings. I have found it very helpful. But in order for us to communicate openly and honestly, we propose today to have a brave and safe space agreement. This agreement is that all participants, all of you joining us from all different parts, will help us create our space while bearing in mind some of these principles. Notice power dynamics in the room, create spaces for multiple truth and norms, be kind and brave, be mindful of the space that you take up, examine bias systems and processes, look for learning, and by entering this space, we ask for your commitment in embracing this agreement. Thank you, mahalo, xie. Welcome again, everyone. So before I turn it over to our wonderful Jordan Ko, as I mentioned, Jordan and I met for the first time 1 month ago. And this was at the AFP Icon in Toronto, and over several adult beverages, we came up with this idea. And Tamarack, I see you nodding. I think you know a little bit about what happens when adult beverages are consumed by fundraisers. Fundraisers are some of the only people that I know that love to talk about work, even when we're not at work. So, of course, we're talking about work, and we got into a heated discussion about our boards, our board engagement. Cleverly enough, Jordan, the most clever person that I know, came up with board like falling asleep board. So I think that has struck a chord with many of you because 75 people have signed up for this meeting, this conversation today. So go ahead, and as I turn the microphone over to Jordan, maybe also drop in the chat so that we can get to know each other. How many people are on your board? I want to know if there's 5 people on your board or if there's 25 people on your board. So Jordan, the microphone is yours, my friend. I pass it to you.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks for that wonderful introduction. It wasn't that many adult beverages, I don't think, but it was just the right amount for all of us there at AFP. Met some great friends that I also see here on that call at AFP Icon. And so I'm also going to drop a poll here of a couple questions that we've got that are relevant to some things that are part of what we'll talk about all along the way on today's conversation. Common things that you probably have heard of and may or may not be doing. And we'd love to hear your feedback so we can kind of include that as we're moving along in today's meeting. So we've got a little agenda here, and it looks like, is my screen not playing along? There we go. We've got a little agenda here on, this is for the recording, so everybody knows what our table of contents is going to be. But thanks to Jennifer, we put this webinar together in particular built around API Heritage Month. And we thought it was really important in that process, as Jennifer and I were having conversations about what that means for this space and for nonprofits. I think that there's a really clear recognition that really needs to be made about power dynamics in particular. I think our safe space agreement and the recognition of those things in our spaces is a really important one for us all to recognize. But particularly as we look at where those biases could play a part and how people are affected by utilizing those biases for positive or for negative, especially in the process of what you're doing, is really important. So I just wanted to highlight that we are here for that month. We're really grateful that all the allies that are joining us on this call today. We mentioned earlier this is being recorded, but we will have a little Q&A at the end of our conversation. So we will stop the recording for that portion so people can ask questions that are a little bit or feel like you have some confidentiality in that process. So a little bit about me. I've been fundraising for almost 20 years now. I guess I just turned 40, so really, really close to 20 now years that I have been fundraising. But I've done it at all different levels of fundraising positions. At fundraising development coordinator, I've been development director, I've been executive director, I've been a board member. And so I've seen a lot of the different ways that these things can impact the sector. I really believe innovation within the administrative side of our nonprofit sector is the thing that we need to move us forward as a collective unit and a collective part of our GDP overall. I also, as you can see here, like dogs and like Baltimore sports, and also don't like webinars that are not kind of practical and things that you can take away. So we're going to try and move quickly through some of these concepts and some of these ideas, but we do want you to feel like when you finish this webinar, there's some things that you can take away from this process that are going to be helpful for you as you are moving forward. So I mentioned this already about the concept of power dynamics, and I think that it's really important to think about the ways that these implement. Board versus staff one is one that I really want to call out at the start of this webinar because it's one that is often the elephant in the room. Your staff or you are often very afraid to confront your board members in any kind of critical way, and for justifiable reason. It is your job, your position. They have a stake in your evaluation overall. And I think the thing that I want to point out here in particular is to try and do your best to break down those barriers of board versus staff. That once those barriers get put up and once that division of board versus staff gets created, then you're down the rabbit hole. It becomes very, very difficult at that phase to unwind those actions. And so you can take steps as you are working through the process of saying we as much as you can, talking about how you utilize and work on things together, how you're doing them together, how you're working on them collectively, how everybody has input in those spaces. It's very, very important right from the onset that you recognize that you're bringing that energy to the table to be successful in terms of what you're accomplishing. Board structures, as a result, become very hyper tied to success. Success versus other in this concept is this idea that, and I'm sure most of the people on this call have experienced this. You've had because you just got a $25,000 check or a $250,000 check or whatever it is in the mail. You didn't expect it coming in, and it led to a lot of success, and everybody was really happy. And they're like, "You're really good at your job. You had no idea this check was coming in. You didn't put any of the work into it. Maybe you did put the work into it a long time ago, connecting, developing, cultivating otherwise. But in a lot of instances, people don't understand what true success is led from in this process and how you arrive at it. And so making sure that you are constantly educating your board members, educating your staff over what success is versus what the other is and why those things come to play is an important one for you to be able to be part of. Board dynamic that I want to make sure that people are aware of is this idea that often your board members are really successful at whatever it is that they've been doing. And so they have a right and they have a history of that success in particular. And you have to be cognizant and you have to be aware of that as you're dealing with those dynamics. But there is the other side of that you have to recognize that you don't just have to learn from these board members. They didn't start nonprofits in a lot of these instances. Their businesses might have been built on a completely different business model. When you're working with your board members in those instances, it's really important to draw distinctions and make sure that you're asking questions about how does this relate to nonprofits? How is this nonprofit centric? How is this related to nonprofits? You don't have to always be operating in a role where as the staff member, as the executive director, as a lower level staff member, you are being taught by your board members things that you need to know. You certainly have things to learn, and we should all be looking for things to learn from each other. I'm sure that there will be, in the conversations that we have at the end of this webinar, fun things for me to learn to do as well. But I think that's an important part for all of us to recognize as we're operating within this space. The other thing that I like to talk about is this concept of good Samaritans to great Samaritans. I think that we are all on this call here today because we want to see accomplished great change. We want a difference in our communities. We want to make it in a difference in the places that we're working at or the places that we're volunteering at. That doesn't always equate into the best way that you're operating or the best things for your organizations from time to time, right? And so I want to make sure that everybody thinks about that when they're doing their work. It's very, very important. The impact and the reason of why you're doing your work matters. But one of the quotes that I always like to repeat is Mother Teresa. She always said, "No money, no mission." You can't pay the people that are doing the work for you. If you can't pay to get these things done, it's not going to make a difference. And so you have to find that balance, right? And that's where the concept of kind of great Samaritan to me comes from in particular, where it's this concept where you can take your good work to the next level. You don't have to say yes to everything. You don't have to say yes to everyone. And you don't have to say yes to every single board member. And so make sure that you're asking, that's why we have the question why here. Make sure you're asking the questions why. Make sure that you're having those open conversations with folks. Make sure that you recognize the power dynamics exist so you're not being obtrusive or offensive or aggressive when you're doing it. But it doesn't mean that you can't do that. The last thing I'd say as we kind of get into just things that you want to make sure that you're being really cognizant of as you're working on this is that everybody is doing this with their best intentions involved. And it's really, I've been in a lot of situations in my career where it's easy to forget this. And this is one that like I should probably make some kind of meme and post it every single day because every time we remember this, it's really important. And this goes beyond your board dynamics. This goes into your staff. It goes into your fundraising work, probably goes into your personal life as well. In most instances, people have the best intentions in terms of what they're trying to do. And sometimes it becomes easy to get lost in whatever that is. Well, they're being really critical about us not making budget. And we did everything we could this year. We've applied to all the grants we thought we could. We made contact with all the donors. We did all the mailings. We did all our best practices. And they're still just being really aggressive about us not reaching our goal. Being able to step back in that moment and say, okay, where do I think our board members are coming from? Where do I think an individual might be coming from as part of this process? Why is this the manifestation of what this conversation is? Finding that place for whoever you might be talking to, but also finding that place for yourself could also be really powerful as you navigate through these. Board relationships are incredibly tricky. They're incredibly rife with power dynamics. You certainly can walk yourself into putting yourself in a situation where you're going to lose. You upset your development committee chair in a different way. They're not going to host their committee meetings anymore. And then all of a sudden downstream, everybody else on your development committee now, because that chairperson is upset with you, is not going to do the work that they're going to do. So even though I said I don't like to talk in platitudes and kind of broad things that are not operational, which I will get into next, I think those are really the overviews of the ways and the mentality that I think are really important when dealing with board members. I really do think that the concept of best intentions by board members is one of the most important ones, though. Finding that middle ground and figuring out what that is and making sure that you are kind of striking that string. That's the wrong idiom, but striking the bell in the right spot in those instances where that is what's going to resonate with that board member, finding that out. That's the true work of great fundraising, is being able to juxtapose kind of your interests, a board member or a donor's interest, and your organization interest all together at the same time. And so think of your board members in the exact same way as you're operating in these processes. So getting beyond kind of what those interests are, I want to talk next about kind of creating buy-in and how you get your board members to actually do the things that they say they're going to do. And so one of the most important things that I think is ownership of concept. And this is an easy one for everybody to do, right? If you've ever worked with like a kid that doesn't want to do something, it's the same concept, which is that you make them think that it's their idea. And then all of a sudden, the amount of work that's getting done within those areas is going to be significantly more. So you always want to be operating within a space where you're thinking about, how do I create ownership of concept to the board members? How do I make them feel like they are the ones that created this idea or that they own this idea? It doesn't always have to be their idea at its creation, but they have to have some part in that early nascent part of the process where they feel like they get some piece of what that ownership is in the process. So what is the physical, easy, tangible way to take away from that? I like to say that at the beginning of every year, and it could be at your board meeting, there are a lot of things that happen at your board meetings. I really wouldn't recommend it at your board meeting, but having a meeting with your board members where you talk about what are our strategic goals for the year. Now, if you already have a strategic plan in place, that's great. Now you can already start your conversation with saying, these are the 3, 6, 9, 2, 1 things that we have set in our strategic plan for the year. If you don't, then you start that conversation at a very more tactical than strategic, but say, hey, what do we want to accomplish by the end of this year? Is our goal, we already set our budget to be a 20% increase. What are some of the other goals that we want to have accomplished when we reach the end of the year? And make sure that everybody is kind of in. Make sure that this is where you can create that sense of ownership, where board members can talk about those goals. It's really important to take notes during the session and recognize where those power plays are, right? Recognize which board members are saying, I'm really interested in this program. I'm really interested in finance. I'm really interested in fundraising, and make sure you're taking notes of that, because that's where you give that sense of ownership to some of those board members later on. I'm doing this because I remember you said that when we were operating on our strategic plan, you were really interested in this. And that's going to keep them motivated. It's going to keep them on track. And it's going to be something that they've already kind of defined as being interested in. So now you said these are the goals that we want to accomplish. And now, as you can see in our bullet here to the right, underneath that, now you say, okay, what can you do to help me with that? And this is your chance. This is just like when you ask somebody for money. I just asked somebody for $100,000. You haven't learned this lesson in fundraising. This one's a freebie. Ask for the $100,000 and then wait and be silent. Don't tell them the answer. Don't give them an excuse. Don't let them get out of it. Let them think about it. Give them the time and space to think about it, and then let them give you your answer before you say something. It's the exact same thing that you want to do with your board members here. You want to say, what do you think that you can do to help us accomplish those goals? And then you let the board members talk. You don't give them any clues. You don't give them any ideas. Now you've created true ownership over the next, it might be 2 things, but hopefully it's more than that, the next 10 to 15 things that you hear from your board. And again, this is the note-taking process. You really want to do, and if you're doing these meetings on Zoom, which you can, use an AI tool that's going to keep notes for you, or keep detailed notes of what everybody has said. If you can use that, keeping all this really well documented is going to serve you in this process as you're moving forward. Now they're going to tell you all the things that they think that they can do to help the goals that they have set in this process. If now you have a complete ownership change for your board members. You have a board member saying, this is what I want to accomplish. This is how I want it done. And you got notes, or you got a recording of this meeting, and them saying that's what they're going to do. And so from there, you go back and you take your time from there and you create a 12-month plan for all of your board members to be able to operate within that space. And you say, okay, we talked about sponsorships and business connections over here. We talked about new introductions to potential major donors here. We talked about introductions to foundations here. And you want to split that up into bite-sized, reasonable asks on a month-to-month basis that are going out to your board. And you want them to be the same requests to all your board members. And this is really critical because there's as in the same way that this can happen with staff, and you can have inequity within staff and how work is being assigned. Often you hear this kind of 80-20 principle, and some people end up with all the work and others. The same thing can happen with your board. You can become really attached to the outcomes of what 1 or 2 board members are doing for you, and really ultimately end up focusing really tightly on those board members with just cause, right? You want those board members to still do that work. You still want them to be motivated. They're still going to do that work because they feel the sense of ownership for you. But you don't want this to be the kind of process where everybody else gets left out as well. So you want to make sure then that you share that into a 12-month plan, and you break that out so people can understand, okay, this is what I need to do every month. I'm not asking everybody for money every month, right? So you have an annual giving plan and you have a gala, and you want to make sure that people are helping you with sponsorship asks in March and annual giving asks in November. Make sure that those are delineated there. Then you're going to eliminate, and I can't tell you how many board meetings I've sat in, whether it's organizations I've worked with or clients, where I get the whole, well, you're constantly asking me to ask people for money. Now you've changed that dynamic. No, we're not constantly asking you to ask people for money. I actually only want you to ask people for money before the gala, and I only want you to ask people for money for annual giving, or whatever time are slated. The other 10 months of the year, I'm actually asking you to do something completely different. I'm asking you to fill out a survey about the impact of our work. I'm asking you to post on social media twice this month. I'm asking you to make an introduction to somebody else to get coffee with me as the executive director. I'm asking you to do all the things that you told me that you could do when we met in January to accomplish the goals that you said that we wanted to achieve together. Now you have created this bond of everybody working together, but you've also diversified that work over a 12-month plan where board members can really see what they want to participate in, what they want to engage in, how they want to do it. And so you've done that with equity. Everybody is going to get the same request at the beginning of every month. This month is introduce someone to Jennifer month. And so all of you are going to get an email draft, and now you're going to set up a call fee for me, you, and Jennifer. And that's what everybody's goal is going to be. You know, the next month it's setting up a meeting with Jordan, or setting a meeting up with someone else, or whatever it is, these goals that you have created, again, created from the things that they've said that they can do. Now, if you have a board that doesn't give you anything that they can do and doesn't contribute in any ways in that way, then you got a completely different issue. You're going to need a facilitator. You're probably going to want someone to come into a board meeting and a strategic planning session with you separately to talk about what that looks like, and maybe talk with you separately about what it looks like to grow and develop your board from there. There's kind of no, if your board members aren't self-motivated in that way, and they can't even see their way to how that they can be helpful to you, then that's a completely different kind of pot of beans, so to speak, is as you're kind of working through that experience. So now you've created this equity in this work plan. Everybody gets the same tasks. Everybody can see how that funnels up into your strategic goal. And now on the other side of this, the two things that we'd say that you really want to do is, one, create a peer-to-peer or some kind of, we talk about this in fundraising all the time, and we talk about it because it's true. It's a little cliche and it's a little annoying, I think, for all of us. But we talk about this concept of like fundraising as a competition, getting people to be doing things against each other, getting people to be competitive about the different things that they're doing. Well, when you have people that are willing to sit on board of directors, they're very much often the kind of people that want to be in those kind of competitions. You want to make sure that you have a soft evaluation tool that's keeping track of all the things that are happening within your 12-month plan, and keeping board members honest about the work that they're doing within those structures, right? So if you can send an email at the end of every month or a week in the next month and say, shout out to, and I'm just going to take the top people that I see on my list, shout out to Tamarack, Brian, Beth, and Noel, the rest of your board's going to look and they're going to say, oh, well, they've been doing their work and everybody else hasn't been doing their work. How do I make sure that I step up and do this? How do I make sure that I'm doing my part? How do we create a shared peer-to-peer experience and what it is we're doing? And so now Jennifer can follow up on that, and she seems exactly the goody two-shoes type. She's going to follow up to that email and say, well, I actually made 3 introductions to Jordan this month because I thought it was really important for us to do. And so now you've created, again, this umbrella of, as you think about it from a linear perspective, you've created ownership of the concept, clear goals about what people need to do, goals that have been identified in the actions that those board members can take, and then put it into an environment where those board members can feel like they can do that, work on that, compete against each other, and do those things to grow your organization overall. So how do you then make these things happen? Because I've given you a practical tool and a step and some pathways about how to do this work. But at the same time, who has the time for this, right? How are you going to accomplish this? How do you make sure that these things are kind of being done? Your board has set their goals and what they want to do. They have this concept of impact. And now all of a sudden, and this is where the board perceptions and dynamics come back into play, is board members now think the things that they said that they needed are really easy. And then, so this is where your work as the kind of intermediary actor, your board of directors, becomes really important, because you have to make sure that you're not overwhelming your staff and turning your staff into your board's assistant, repeating tasks and doing things over and over and over again. And again, this is why we really like this idea of a 12-month calendar, where you've architected everything that you want to do in advance, and you've created all the steps and the tools of the things that you want. So when you get to the points that you need to drop in things that are kind of time relevant or a time appropriate, or include a picture of something that's happened from a program that you're doing, you can do those in those instances. But you really want to try and keep to your framework of those actions that you want to do. You want to keep them as simple and bite-sized as you can in this process, because your board is going to perceive them as simple. So what does that mean? That means don't promise to send mail merges on behalf of your board members. members, right? Don't promise to do extensive reports to your board members. Don't promise these big things that could be really valuable, right? Like if you have a very involved board that is reviewing reports from your CRM, deeply looking into your financials and doing all kinds of great work, let them do that work to get the reports that they need in that process. Don't include them in this, right? Do that work in that committee, do that work in that space. But this is thinking about your board as an entire conceptual group as a whole. How do we activate everybody together? How do we keep everything simple and able to be something that they're able to accomplish? How do we make sure that that's part of what that is? So once you simplify those actions, now to your staff, see what the chart is for each upcoming month, and maybe the staff meeting the week before February, in January, you talk about the things that are coming up. Oh, well, we've got to get this survey ready. We've got to get the social media post draft together. We've got to get this introduction email together for whatever it is we're doing. Making sure that you make them simple. Don't ask your staff to be doing 10 things every single month. Don't be asking people to go to extensive reporting, all the committee meetings, all those things. You're going to burn your staff out in the process. And then you're going to get back to that thing that I talked about when we started the webinar, which is that you're going to end up getting back to that whole board versus staff. Well, they aren't doing the things that we said. So the danger of asking your staff to do too much is not actually the fact that they can't get it done. I work with a lot of nonprofit employees. They are salt of the earth. They get almost everything done that they need to get done to be successful, and they do it on less benefits and less salary, right? The reason that they're really the area you're really going to go wrong in this process is that the staff is going to spend a lot of time creating the thing that you asked, and then your board is going to have to do something that's complex on their side, and they're not going to do it, and then your staff is going to be mad at the board. And so now the board is going to make excuses because they have the best intentions, which we talked about earlier, of getting something done. They're going to blame it on the complexity of the task that you asked them to do. The staff has spent all this time creating the thing that you want that board member to do. They're not going to do it. And so the staff is going to point at the board and they're going to say, they never do anything. And the board is going to point at the staff and they say, they never give us what we need. And now you've created a space where nobody's going to be happy and nothing's going to be successful in this process. So the oversimplification of everything that you're doing here is critical. So if you think that there are 2 or 3 steps that need to happen to make one of these things successful and accomplished as you're operating within this space, rethink that concept. Boil it down, make it simpler, stretch it over multiple months. If you have a 4-step thing that you need to accomplish, let's say you are trying to, I'm just making this up now. I should have thought of a better example before the meeting, but we're trying to get somebody to join our committee meeting, right? We have the development and an event committee, and there's this one person that we think is a really good person to join that committee, right? Instead of going through the process of having coffee, inviting them to the committee meeting, and sending them all the information about the committee, doing all that in 1 month, that's going to overwhelm a volunteer anyway to begin with. Split those all up. In January, we're going to have coffees with new people that we want to join the committee meetings, right? In February, we're going to send all of our collateral to anybody that we've already met with around that on those coffees. In March, we're going to send invitations to those people to formally join those committees and set our calendar schedule. In April, we're going to follow up with the people that didn't give us yeses to that, right? Make sure that you're stretching each of those steps out by a month at a time. And again, this is where this concept, I tell this to my team and anybody I've worked with before. The key to fundraising, or the challenge to fundraising, is that you don't get back. Everything takes time. Relationships take time. Cultivation takes time. We all know this too well. Getting checks takes time. All of it takes time. So you need to be putting the work in and spreading it out over time, recognizing that for the most part, your donors and the people that you're coordinating with from a fundraising perspective are on a completely different timeline you are. Right. This is why you don't want to be backed up against kind of what your expectations are for your budget. Need a donor to write you a check for $25,000 that day, then you might be in trouble, right? You want to be operating within space. That donor, you might make the ask in June and get the check in September, and that's totally okay. And for anybody that hasn't had that happen to you, that's totally normal. There are a lot of people that are probably on this call that have had that very same experience in this process themselves. We'd say that happens to everybody in this process too. So you need the time to operate within this. So it's okay if you're planning from the start of the year to operate with time, but you have to do that with good preparation, with good strategy and good tactics. The strategy is the concept of ownership by your board. The tactics is your 12-month plan about how you're going to implement that. So the other area that, Jennifer and I talked about, and I can't just get away from a conversation without talking about KPIs. This one is the one that I think that is one of the most important things that you can accomplish. One of the ways this works with board members is the board members love to talk about KPIs. Board members love to talk about business tools and how those business tools can apply to nonprofits. They want to talk about how everything that they have done can be similar to what you are doing. A lot of them, especially the successful ones, have come from the KPI space for a reason. So they like using nonprofit lingo, like terms like key performance indexes. And so for anybody that doesn't know what a KPI is, I'm just going to briefly cover what that is and how that operates, which is that this is the idea that if your budget is $100,000 and you are only operating with major donors, let's say you don't have an annual giving fund, you don't have any grants, you just only operate from major donors that write you checks of $5,000 and higher. And you know that based on your organization's history, for every 6 coffees that you take with the donor that you want to ask for $5,000, you get one of them. So then you need 20 of those. You need 120 coffees by the end of the year asking for $5,000. Your key performance index is the 120 coffees, right? That your board is reviewing that level of evaluation for your work and agreeing to it at that stage of the process. They're going to say that we see why you set it at 120. We recognize it and we agree with you about what that space is and why that's important. And so then you're able to operate on that set of 120. And so that's why we say next, growth is not always linear. I love the fundraising lessons that turn into life lessons. This is another one of those where growth is not linear. Fundraising is not linear. The check that comes in that's $5 that turns into a $5,000 check next year that turns into a $5,000 check the year after that. Don't always expect it to grow by 10% or whatever your average budget growth is. Be prepared for those things not to be linear. In the same breath, if you're doing 120 coffees where you're asking people for $5,000, sometimes the first 5 are going to say yes, and then the next 60 are going to say no. And you've got to be prepared for that. You've got to have that mentality. If you set up the KPIs in advance and you have your board bought in on it, now all you have to do when you're reporting back to your board is saying, hey, we are on track to have our 120 coffees this year, right? If the board wants to come after you and say, we're not on track, then you can say, well, we all agreed to this 120. Do we need to change the number? And if we do need to change the number, then maybe I need you to introduce me to more people that I can go and have these coffees with that, right? Again, you're always then able to kind of flip that back from an ownership perspective because boards have bought in on kind of whatever these outcomes might be that you need in the first place. So think about how you can insert those into any of your fundraising activities. That could be your event for sponsorships. That could be a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign. That could be the number of emails that you send out with requests, asks, how you operate your annual giving plan, all kinds of different things like that. Again, if there's one thing that I could change overnight in the nonprofit sector, it was that we didn't live in this world where budgets made the answers and budgets made the decisions about how we did these things. It was our KPIs, but there has to be a little bit of education and process within that and your team as you're doing that. So then you want to leverage your evaluation tools as you operate within that space. You want to think about how you can share this information with your board of directors. Again, how do I do this simply? How do I do this easily? How do I do this from a manageable way and a manageable process? I think the 12-month plan has always been the thing that I've seen be the most successful. You need a board chair that's going to be with you on it. Stick to your plan, stick to your goals, stick to the things that you said you were going to do at the beginning of the year. Anyone that wants to deviate, you could say, hey, we're going to have a meeting next January, just like we had this January. This is what we agreed to for this year. Come ready for next year. Get them hungry for that meeting and get them ready to go in that same space. The last thing that I want to talk about today before we jump into a Q&A session is the notion of give get. And so what we have here, we ran a little poll. We had 67% of people have a give get in their board requirements. And of the 21 participants, we also asked if the majority of your board contributes the time at the level that they would like. And your answer, 67% of that said no. So we have a clear disparity here of we have a give get. So we've tried to set expectations. When I love give gets, I think that they're really important, and I think that they're the right things for organizations to have. I think everybody should have some kind of give get in their process. But then if boards are not contributing in the ways that you'd like to see them do, how do we mesh those two things against each other? And so one of the things that we really have, I just got into this recently. This is kind of new and innovative to me, but it's giving people an out on their give get, but making it action oriented. now you have this 12-month plan of all these things. And maybe there's a check that maybe typically in November, it's make your annual donation. Our give get is $500. And you're reminding people of that when they get to that space in November. But maybe not everybody can give $500. And I know that there are different, it's different for every organization and different people feel differently about it. I'm a big board person and I am a forgive, give, get person. And this is a perfect way to let you out of that case where you can say, okay, you can't fulfill your give get, but these are the things that we said we were going to do at the beginning of the year. I need you to do 85% of that. I need you to do 65% of that. I need you to do 95% of that. Whatever that number is. Now you have, again, going back to this concept of ownership, you've taken a thing that board members have created themselves, things that they've said that they can do to help move the organization forward, identify tasks that they think that are going to be things that they can do. And now you're going to basically say to them, you can save the money that you don't think that you can afford right now by doing those actions. If your board members are not able to kind of operate through that part of the process and see how that's contributing in that way and being part of this, you've kind of already self-evaluated that. That's kind of the other question that we asked here is whether or not folks have a board evaluation process. And 85% of you said that you don't have a board evaluation process. This concept and this execution gives you a natural board evaluation process. Again, you've given yourself the out when someone says, hey, we should do this instead, to say, welcome to the meeting next year. I'd love for you to lead it and facilitate it, get other people to give these outcomes, and we'll on to the list for next year. But you've also created this 12-month chart filled with simplistic concepts and ideas of what you want to execute. You can track whether or not board members did or didn't do those specific activities in the process of that. And you can use that as a tool to then evaluate your board members on this process. Now you're not only on the bottom line. Now we've stepped away from budget. I said that I don't like this idea of budget driving all these decisions. I believe that, but then you have to be the leader. And this is as all executive directors and even development directors have to be in these processes. You have to be the leader on some of these things. Now we've said, okay, we recognize that the money is going to come from the actions that we take. Now we're giving you a way out of your give get. And it doesn't have to be hard line going and asking your friends for these money, but we asked you to set up a peer-to-peer page. We asked you to post on social media. We asked you to invite 10 people to come to our event, whatever those things are. As long as you're doing those things, we know that's the good work that needs to happen to facilitate the fundraising that we're going to achieve. We've all agreed on that together. That means that you have your give get from that perspective, because we're operating on a key performance index metric and not just a have you written what is the final dollar number, what is the bottom line number that we have here. This is going to motivate your board members that don't have the ability to write that check. There's often, I can't tell you how many times I've seen really quality board members that have connected me and led to more dollars on those boards to step off the board because they feel like they aren't contributing enough because they're looking around and other people are writing checks. And I have to go to those people and explain to them, and it rarely works that, oh, well, Mike might have written a $10,000 check, but you actually helped us raise $40,000 through your actions. And maybe it wasn't your friends, and maybe it wasn't really like a get in the sense that you think of it, but your efforts and your work have helped us in these ways. And that's why you should stay on this board. It doesn't work, or it hasn't worked for me in terms of keeping those people on the board. So if you change the metric in the way that you're evaluating, in the way that you're sharing about your board members in that same concept, then you're able to kind of turn that into a tool where those people feel really empowered. They feel like they're contributing. You can tell them contributing to not just the actions that they're doing, but the culture of your organization and how you're changing this very approach of the thing that you're doing within that overall process. So those are kind of our tangible steps that we want to have from a takeaway perspective overall for you guys. Simplicity is key because time is your best asset. You want to create ownership from your board members. You want to create simple tasks for them to be able to potentially execute in the process. You want to measure those actions from a key performance index process. Get the board bought in on that view and that process of evaluation and seeing where their part and where they can contribute into that space. So for anyone that wants to learn a little bit about some other tools outside of this webinar that are productive for that, my team and my company has built a tool that's similar to that. Please reach out to me afterwards. We have something that can help you execute on this 12-month piece overall, but I don't want to talk about that specifically on this webinar, but I'd be happy to do that with anybody that wants to reach out to me afterwards. I think Jennifer is going to take us to the question portion, and I am going to stop the recording. Is there anything else you want to say before we stop recording, Jennifer?
No, several people have asked for the recording. So the answer is yes, we will be sending out the recording to everybody who has registered. So if your friends are interested and they want a recording, just have them sign up on the link for this event. So in any case, thank you, Jordan, for those remarks. I keep following